this video forum to share with you just how delighted I am about all the rich and interesting conversations and connections and puzzles and curiosities that everyone seems to be bringing throughout all the various teams participating in this run of the Power of Making Thinking Visible course offered through Project Zero Online. I've been with these ideas for many years myself. I've worked with these ideas when I was in the classroom, and now I continue to work with schools all around the world with these ideas, both through this course and also consulting and various other kinds of engagements. So I know the ideas quite well, I would think. I have some familiarity with them, I'll say it that way. But what I don't have any insight on is how you're interacting with these ideas until indeed you make your thinking visible. And so just seeing what the facilitators have summarized and sent my way, going into the discussion forums myself and having a look at what people are posting, it's truly a joy. It makes me excited because we are a wide-ranging group, people participating in this course from all around the world, as you'll see through some of the quotes that I share with you today. And it's just exciting to know there are so many people in lots of places wanting to do amazing things with the students in front of them and care very deeply about that. So enough of this preamble, other than I just want to share my appreciation for each one of you. So I suppose that's not much of a preamble. That's a well-deserved gratitude expression. And now I'd like to share some reflections with you. So here we are in week 2, and as you see on the screen, while I am the course instructor, this course just is so rich because of the participation and the hard work of these dedicated people: Stephanie, Tara, Dolph, Sarah, Cameron, and Shayla. All of them, as I mentioned last week, and as you already have seen in the discussion forums, or perhaps you've read their biographies, just wonderful people who have put these ideas into practice themselves in a lot of different ways, in classrooms and other learning settings like museums, and also in leadership. And so having their voice in the forum for your benefit, to keep conversations going and to summarize and reflect back what they're seeing and hearing, and then also what they share with me. It's just really wonderful to have them as part of the team. Some of the headlines they shared this week: students invited to take ownership of learning. Deep learning, a chrysalis-like transformation or transforming process. Here's another headline around the transformation: deep learning empowers and transforms learners to take action. Another headline: a symphony of interconnectedness, transferability, and the pivotal role of prior knowledge. The art of questioning, a work in progress. Headlines give us a glimpse as to what kinds of things have been talked about in the discussion forums. Of course, they're not the full story, but pretty exciting headlines here. I don't see teachers facing a roadblock, feeling they can never do anything. I don't see that headline here. I see lots of headlines, forward thinking, certainly tapping into the power of making thinking visible. I guess that's apt name for the title of our mini course here. Really just noting some of the headlines are really capturing the essence of that whole process we had you undertake around making meaning of that topic, deep learning. So many posts sharing the conversations you had in your teams. Pretty exciting for us to see. I've only captured a few here, but yeah, how did you like the process? I'm hoping it was exciting for you. You were individually and collectively making meaning, putting out the words, and then the add-ons, and then the connections from there, and raising questions so that you can really pull into your own walking around definition of deep learning. And as I've already mentioned, a big part of that is when you put your thumb down on your own idea, well, what is deep learning? What are the qualities that make that happen? I think it's then and only then that you're setting yourself up in a position to act on those qualities more, or to spot the occasion to turn the volume up on those sorts of qualities. Looking broadly at the definitions that people are posting, of course, I wasn't in each one of your teams and listening to all your rich conversations, but it certainly seemed like there were themes and categories that were coming up quite a bit. It seemed like a lot of your definitions of deep learning had a lot to do with connection making, and curiosity. That the learner is sort of in this constant state of pursuing that which they're curious about, interested in, passionate about, but also curious in terms of what they're perplexed by or what they're puzzling. So curiosity takes on lots of forms. And then connections just saw a lot of reference to the idea of deep learning involves looking for links, looking for relationships, looking for how things fit together. Meaningful inquiry saw lots and lots of qualities in your definitions of deep learning that had a lot to do with, again, the questions, the role of questions, students being driven by their questions, and it having some meaning for them and for the teacher, creating the conditions for that meaningful inquiry. Deep learning, it sounds to me like many of you were trying to put your thumb down on this idea that deep learning isn't just something you do in an isolated way, that it unfolds within the collaboration of others. So there is the role of self. If I'm going to deeply learn something, internally, and individually, there's my sense of constructing some understanding, but that's elevated. It seems to go deeper than when I can take my ideas and brush them up against others, and maybe that's that chrysalis-like transformation in many ways. I think some of your team meetings are feeling like that for you, right? You have your own understanding about ideas, but as you bring your self perspectives into the company of others' perspectives, right? There's just more illumination, more chances to see things from a different angle, and perhaps deepen an idea for you or challenge an idea for you. A lot of the definitions of deep learning had elements of this notion that deep learning involves transfer to new or even unknown situations. Another version of that was application, that you've learned deeply when you're able to work with that into new situations, which really resonates with the long line of research coming out of Project Zero for many, many years now. The idea of what does it mean to understand, and how does understanding develop, and we at Project Zero take on this performance view of understanding, that when you really understand something, perhaps this idea of deep learning, you can work with that understanding in new situations. And it seems like many of you have felt that or articulated that yourself. When you've had students just say what they know, but you really have insight into their understanding when you see them work with it in new situations. There was also this notion that I wanted to put my thumb down on, or bring to light here in these reflections, this idea of perceived worth, that deep learning feels worthwhile. Our colleague at Project Zero, one of the founding directors of Project Zero, Professor David Perkins, has written some wonderful articles in years past around this idea of life-worthy learning, right? It's not just these niche skills that one acquires, but those skills giving ways to understand the world around them, right? That when you're learning something, you're not just learning about that something, you're learning with that something, right? So deep learning involves this perception of worth. What I'm learning here has a relationship to this world out there. And the world out there then has relationship to what we do in here. So Just pulling some of these out. Catch me next week at this time if I relook at some of your definitions. I don't know. Maybe I would come up with a few other kinds of categories other than these. But where I'm sitting today, these were some big themes that seem to pop out at me. And why do I even want to draw your attention to them? Well, I suppose it's something that I said a moment ago. It's when we call out these conditions for deep learning, right? Deep learning involves both individual and collective sort of endeavoring. That deep learning involves having some meaningful questions and inquiry that drives the learning. Deep learning involves making connections. Once I've articulated those kinds of qualities or features or conditions, then it puts me in a position as an educator to look for the occasions and spot the opportunities to create those conditions more and more for our students. That's why we keep calling these walking around definitions, not what the school says I'm supposed to say deep learning is, or what government policy says I'm supposed to say it is. It's what do I come to understand individually as one who leads learning? Because the walking around definition is probably the easiest one to live because it's closest to your heart. So I'm not saying deep learning means anything we want it to be. And clearly you don't believe that either. Deep learning involves these kinds of qualities. So I wish you well as you continue on your efforts to promote deep learning for your students. The process of making meaning, I saw this, Rashida is one of our participants in this course. I did not on these slides notice where you're from or the group you're part of. I'm so sorry. I just saw your post in there and I just grabbed this image. So forgive me, Rashida, please. But this colleague did the making meaning routine, revisiting the topic of fractions with their students, and yeah, I saw other posts where people were talking about they did making meaning with something that their students were undertaking here these past days. And so please, we want you to make use of these thinking routines. You know, the whole middle section of the book introduces you to a bunch of thinking routines. And in fact, that's what session 3 is all about, looking at some of those thinking routines in a more close way rather than around the surface way. Now you're really diving into those thinking routines chapters, but just wanted to make sure that you realize that many of the processes we're having you undertake as a team are processes then that, you know, you're welcome and in fact encouraged. We want you to use those same routines and processes with those learners you lead, whether they be your colleagues or the students in your charge. A few quotes I want to share with you. There were lots of quotes around the role of the student in deep learning, and I think that's really powerful. Like, that was really the theme of the session 2, you know, the payoff for students when we make our thinking visible. What's the power for them? Gregory, Maria, Jessica, and Karen from one of our virtual teams, Virtual Team 4, they wrote, through our experience, we want to continuously try to put our students in charge of their own learning experience. This means we need to get learners to trust the process, even if it's something they are not used to. All 4 of us want to encourage curiosity and deeper learning while allowing students to feel comfortable in the process. We want them to know it's okay to make mistakes. The process is messy and difficult, but the reward to deep learning is worth it. Really thinking about putting students in the position to feel it, live it, experience it. You know, if we want students to be in charge of their own learning, yet we never give them any opportunities to do just that, then we complain, oh, these students are they're not independent. They just want to be spoon-fed. Well, you know, the role that we cast students in is the role they'll get really good at. And so the role of helping them understand that mistakes are part of the learning process, understanding that they can make choices and be in charge of their own learning. I just really admire what they've written for us here in this quote. So thank you for that. Another quote, this comes from Pasita. This is one of our colleagues. There's a group of colleagues, part of an organization there, these reading buddies. They're in the Philippines. And this colleague wrote, when students are in a safe space where they're allowed and encouraged to speak, they find the courage to engage and collaborate with others and freely share their ideas and themselves. Through the Making Thinking Visible practices, students are able to have a voice in the classroom. I hope that is the case, right? That is what we want, is students to feel known and valued here, that their voice matters. Um, and they're only going to believe that to be true. They'll only learn to trust the process, as our friends up there in Virtual Team 4 said, is if that's the role they're cast in over and over again. So really, there are many, many more quotes that I could put there, but thinking about the power of making thinking visible for the students and what role can we cast them in that will help them feel empowered and engaged. With that comes the role of the teacher. Some wonderful quotes around many of you thinking about your role in the process. This is Florence from the International School of Dusseldorf, where I used to be a teacher many years ago, back in the 90s. But Florence wrote, I'm used to front loading the teaching, working on cutting back on front loading my teaching and trusting in the students to show their thinking and to share their prior knowledge to explore topics. Yeah. Florence really thinking, oh yeah, the role I often do is I front load. I'm assuming that you have good intentions with that, Florence. And so with that in mind, right, just playing around with that idea. Okay, I often front load, and what does that afford? But what might that hinder? Might I cut back on front loading and trust students to show their thinking? And might that create another opportunity for them? Maybe, maybe. For me, it's never do I front load or don't I? Do I or don't I? That's a very, I don't know, it's a very dichotomous sort of conundrum. So I often think about, like, when might I? When might I front load? And what difference would that make? When might I hold back and think that could actually stop them from making connections from prior knowledge or making their thinking visible? So, Florence, thank you for sharing that. Alistair at Brisbane Grammar School. Oh, I do some work nearby in Brisbane. Alistair wrote, ensure the students are doing the heavy lifting when learning and reducing the teacher's role in the process of thinking. Really, who's doing the lifting here? Who's making sense of the ideas? Who's doing the learning here? Can I put my students in that role rather than doing that lifting for them? Now, I do see the verb reducing the teacher's role in the process of thinking. That reducing, that's the sort of the word that I want to hone in on. I love the intention of what Alistair is saying there, and I don't know that reducing is the word I would use, though, because I don't think I'm reducing my role. I'm taking on a different kind of role. And so maybe it's a reduction in a transmission role or the doing it for them role. So I get that bit. But if I'm putting it all on the students, right, that doesn't mean I'm over here doing nothing. And I'm not saying that's what Alistair is mentioning here at all. Just wanting to draw everybody's attention to it is, when students take on another kind of role, what does that create opportunities for me? What other roles can I take on if I'm not doing all the fixing or the rescuing, so on and so forth? That's related to a quote from Jing Li from Virtual Team 2. It can be challenging for us, particularly when time is limited and a valuable resource, and that we often have to consider. Right? Giving freedom to students may seem like losing control over the pace of learning. However, when we take on the role of observer, we might find ourselves surprised by the level of capability and accountability students can demonstrate in their learning. Yeah, Jing Li, I think that illustrates something I was just attaching there to the quote that Alistair wrote, that right, when we put students in another kind of role, it puts us in that position to be observers or listeners in our own classroom. That's some of your questioning. How can my questioning get better? How can my listening get better? Well, when thinking becomes routine and students are put in that role to do that routinely, could that clear some space on the bandwidth for me to take on another kind of role? So I want to encourage you all to consider the possibilities for you. If I don't have to just transmit everything, then what else could I do that could be deep and powerful for my students? I want to close up some reflections with some personal moments of growth that I think were very powerful. This quote from Sana in Pakistan: I feel that my role as a teacher is better defined as a facilitator, using the various thinking routines as leading to an organic shift in responsibility of learning from solely the teacher to the students. And I find myself as more of an expert facilitator than expert teacher. It's something very new for me, but definitely very refreshing. Oh, I'm really happy that you're having that experience, Sana, and I know that you're not alone in that. Many of you might feel unsettled by, if I'm trying something new, then I don't know, it feels clunky, of course. But to commit to considering what other roles I can take on, like Sana is doing here, and finding some joy in that. Um, that's what I want the case to be for many of you, or all of you, in fact, not just many of you. Another quote that I just thought was very powerful is from Vishnumurti from India. And forgive me for mispronouncing your name. But I just love this quote. During the group discussion, talking about the team time, I realized the difference between teaching and knowing. One may know a lot of things, but may not be able to communicate effectively to learners, which hinders understanding. Delivering lecture by itself is not the end of teaching unless it results in visible transformation in the receiver. I may here add that the result of transmission is only temporary, whereas result of transformation is more or less permanent. Yeah, I think that's rather profound, right? Again, it's thinking about the role. If my role is to transmit and their role is just to receive, then that may be a temporary moment. But if I take on another role rather than transmitting the curriculum, I'm trying to make the curriculum accessible to my students via their thinking opportunities. Might that create some moments of transformation? Because they've done learning, and that sticks with them. My friends, these reflections could go on and on, but I'll call it quits for today. You're on session 3. We're exploring some of the thinking routines in the middle part of the book. Routines all about engaging with ideas, engaging with others and one another, and engaging in action. So I wish you well this week. Enjoy what we've planned for you in the session and your team time. And I cannot wait to see what shows up in the discussion forums this week. Big thanks to the facilitators and to all of you for being part of this. And I'll see you next week.